Well, here we are at the start of another project, but I thought I'd do something a little bit different. A lot of my time is spent making wooden wheels. I'm what they call a wheelwright. It's not a bad way to earn a living. I quite like it. Recently I seem to be making a bit of a name for myself in doing market carts. And this is one that's come in. This is not a how to make it video. Let's be honest, you're unlikely to want to make yourself a market cart. Well, this is what they call a Costermongers cart. It's a two-wheel cart. It's used by sort of a market porter. This one dates from before the First World War and was used at Spitalfields market, which is one of the sort of famous markets of London. Still there, but it's no longer a fruit and veg market. And so the family or the hire company that was responsible for hiring out the wagons or the carts at that market would carve their name and address along the main beam of the cart, but it would also be all the way round the wheel as well. So they would never get them confused, but you could also tell whose cart is who. And there's a couple of sort of famous family names. The one I seem to be coming across most recently is a company called Tappy, and they did the Lambeth Walk Market. Now this cart has seen its better days, and I've been asked to bring it back to life. So it needs a new set of wheels, as you can see. That's never, whilst it goes around, it's never going to bear a weight again. So I need a new set of wheels. Lots of this is completely riddled with woodworm and is falling apart, as you can see, so that all needs to be replaced. New bits need to be made, and then it all needs to be painted up. And by the end of it, it'll be really quite smart and will be good for another 100 years. I think it's exciting, but then I probably need to get out more. I'm not going to spend too much time on the video showing you how to make wheels. I've made wheels on videos many times before. These ones are no different. They're just wheels. They're not particularly exciting wheels, but they're just a nice wheel. So we've now got the wheels off. This one, the outer rim called the Fellies, pretty well had it. The spokes, I'm not even going to bother trying to save. If it was a sort of a museum or something like that, you might think about it, but this is not going to be for a museum. This is going to be stuck in someone's garden, so we might as well give them a fighting chance. But I think the hub, whilst it's covered in stuff, when it's cleaned up, I think that's usable. That still is pretty solid. I mean, you can see where the moss and lichen has been on it, but that scrapes off, that cleans up, and it actually comes out looking pretty good. So that we can save. This one, whilst all the felly sections are there, they're absolutely infested with woodworm, so I'm not even going to bother trying to save these either. But what you can see is written all the way across here, or carved into the wood, is the name of the hire company, and we want to be able to replace that. That's part of the barrow's history, so whilst it's going to have a new set of fellies, we still want to be able to identify it. And so that I stand a fighting chance of working out what it says. Remember your days of school when you used to do a brass rubbing? Well, this is the wheelwright's equivalent. So I shall go around and do this all the way over, and then when I've got this, then I can take the wheel apart. Right, so I can now use that. That will give me the spacing, and the combination of that and that in good condition. I'll have the lettering and then we can redo it. So I'll now just completely disassemble these, take the spokes out, take the fellies off, see whether we can save the hub. Well, it looks pretty grim, but underneath it all it's all pretty solid. Well, here we are after sort of half hours fettling and doing stuff. You wouldn't think that was the same hub, would you? But that is pretty solid, so I don't think we need to worry about making another one. So with the wheels made, now we're ready to turn our attention to the cart itself. And the first thing we do is try and work out what's good, what's bad, what's not right, and start taking it apart. And what I like to do is, as I take a piece apart, I make its replacement. No, I'll rephrase that. As I take a piece apart, if it's no good, then I'll make its replacement. If it can be reused, if it can be salvaged, if it can be made whole again, then we'll keep it. Because ideally, we want to keep as much of the old stuff as possible. But then you get bits like this. I originally thought it came bent like this, but when you look at it, you can see that it's broken here, and this bend in the sort of bit of steel over the top is not in the centre. If this is how it's supposed to have been, then that bend would have been in the middle. So, and it's all pretty well woodwormed anyway. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this piece off. We can straighten that bit of steel in the forge. That's not too much of a big deal. Lots and lots of lubricating spray, and slowly we'll take it apart. So we'll take this bit off, we'll make a new piece, straighten that bit up. It's got a little bit of carving on the front here, so that will have to be done. And then I made two new side rails. Most of these are good. You know, the one at the end there is rotten, and the one at the end there is rotten. Now at the front, I don't think this bit is original. I think that's something that somebody's just sort of nailed in there, just to sort of, but in the kit of bits that came with it, what I did get was this piece here. I need to look very closely at this one. There's a lot of woodworm in it, but it feels fairly solid. I mean, there's a few bits here, but I think that could probably be patched up. If not, I'll make another bit. But I think that bit would have gone there, and we've got these bits of steel which would coincide with this bit here. So that's probably going to fit out there, I reckon. That would make perfect sense. As you can see, this is the original piece with woodworm all over it. It's pretty wormy, it's pretty rotten. I think we can safely say I'm never going to make that look good. So this is my new piece, which I roughly sawn to shape, but you will notice that all the curves have been chamfered. Well, these all the curves on the outside. The ones on the inside have not been chamfered, but the ones on the outside. The sort of costermongers were the sort of, I mean, the sort of the flash market traders. They were the ones who wore bright red waistcoats with lots of buttons on it, and eventually became what's been known as the Pearly Kings. Or I suppose I should say what became known as the Pearly Kings and Queens. So what I've now got to do is to sort of chamfer these bits, and then in the middle here you can see 31B. Well, at some point I shall have to carve that in there as well, and then when it's done you can just see the remains of the green paint. So in all of this, the traditional colours is the sort of the upper part is all this sort of market cart green. I think they call it alpha green in the paint catalogue. Now all the upper sections are in green, the lower sections are in red, and this one's going to have one or two little bits of extra decoration on it because that's what the customer wants. So let's just chamfer these bits in. Let's see how we get on. So I'm using a very sharp the moment of truth. So now we come to the part that I probably find the most challenging but most interesting. Each market around London, I'm sure around the rest of England, would have a family who would hire out the market carts, and they could differentiate between the various different families and the different carts by inscribing their name or carving their name of the company and where they were based on the wheel and on the structure of the cart. And you've seen me do it in several places. And I don't know whether there was a sort of a common script or whether it was one bloke who went round and did them for all of the carts. But it's the most godforsaken script. I mean, it's very flowery. It probably dates back to sort of the 1800s, so it's this very sort of flowery, flowing script. And they don't quite make sense, but what I've tried to do is copy it as far as I can. So what we have written here is Howard. So the name of the company was E. Howard and Sons, but they used the term Howard. And then the address is Wheeler Street. But again, it's a very flowing, and the R which they've used, you're not quite sure that it's an R or an N, but I've checked it several times. And it is Wheeler Street, because there would be nothing wrong with me getting the spelling wrong. And then 31B, which was the number they were. I've got the original wheel sections, and you can see this is this sort of strange script. I mean, for a better sort of look at this sort of script, let's have a look at the side of the cart itself. So here we can just make out the H, and you follow it through to Howard, but as you can see, it is very flowery. 31B is down this end, and then if we move across, Whelan Street. But this this R at the end, you're not quite sure if it's an R or an N. But as I say, I've checked it several times, and it is most definitely an R. So it's Wheeler Street. Well, that's the sort of rough shape of the handle, but the best way I can do it is to put this next to the other one and feel the difference. It needs a bit of sanding down, but really it's about the same. There's very little to choose between them. So with a bit of sanding, I'd say the job's a good one. Well, I think this is about as bad as it gets. Every time I took a piece off, I started to look a piece, another bit fell off. This was pretty rotten. But I think we've reached a point that I've replaced all the bits I'm going to replace. It would have been very easy just to replace the whole of that. Well, I say I mean, there's bolts here that go all the way through, and if I tried to take them out, I'd end up cracking all of these, which would have been ridiculous. So what I've done is I've scarfed in pieces that are on. I made a new handle here. You can just see I made an end of a handle there, so we've kept the original handle. Partly for historical reasons, but when you look along this, I suppose we would call it the transom piece, but this is like the centre. All the history of this cart is to be shown on this one bit. So by putting my little bit on the end there and just carving in that extra bit, I can retain the history. The customer doesn't want a new cart. It would have been very easy and much quicker and probably cheaper just to replace the lot and keep the wheels or keep the metalwork. But this is a cart that means an awful lot to my customer, and therefore it means an awful lot to me. Well, as you can see, this was one of the more interesting pieces to scarf in. One of the problems you face when you do something like this is something's been broken forever and you mend it, and you realise the reason it got broken in the first place is because it got bent out of shape. And nothing on this thing is square. There is a bracket running up the middle here, which is like a U-shaped bracket, and it got broken in the middle. So I welded it back together, so it's now, which then means this bit doesn't fit, which is really irritating. But somehow I've got to make it fit. So as I start to sort of put this back together, I'm trying to make sense of this sort of pile of bits that I've got to go with it, and I'm rapidly coming to the conclusion that what I've actually got here is a kit of bits, not necessarily all from the same cart. Well, I was having such a good time putting this all back together, I forgot to film anything, which probably doesn't make for a very exciting film. On the other hand, I spent hours and hours sanding and painting and sanding and painting, which is probably not very exciting to watch. But I'm now at the point, well, I mean, you can see where we are. We've got the main structure back together, and it's painted green. I've done the metalwork black. It's had its first coat. Could probably do with a bit more. So my next job is to start putting these boards across the top here. Some of them are the original boards, and some of them are some new ones that I've cut. The old ones are just too far gone, too rotten. But as you can see, the end is in sight. So I suspect it helps if you don't breathe very often, because you do need to keep a very steady hand. Well, here we are, the wheels are now on, and we have a completed cart. If you think back to the start of the video, which in video terms is only a few minutes, but in my terms it's sort of, several weeks ago. This was a real wreck of a cart, but it's got some new wheels, it's got some new bits of wood. I've managed to keep the important bits which show the history of the cart, for which I'm particularly pleased. It's had lots of coats of paint, a couple of go faster stripes. All in all, it's come out rather well. May not have been the most exciting video to watch, but it was quite a nice fun project to do. So now we wheel this one out to the workshop, and I've got a 4-wheel one to do. But I probably won't bother making a video like that. There's a limit to how many you can watch. But you've enjoyed watching this one, then go and have a look at some of the other ones. You never know, you might enjoy those as well. If you'd like to get in touch with me, I always like to hear from people, especially the nice ones. In the meantime, thanks for watching. Bye bye.